Yeah, it started.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call the meeting to order for the Municipal Accountability Review Board for the Hartford Subcommittee. Today is January the 18th, and we do have a quorum. The time is 10:04. As far as the first order on the agenda is to call the meeting to order, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that this is it's kind of a milestone for the city of Hartford, and it's the very first meeting by which the city has been redesignated from a tier 3 to a tier 2 municipality under the MARB's oversight. So this is really a large milestone as a first meeting under tier 2. As far as MARB's responsibilities, those will change a little bit by we will not have as much work to do as we did before, and that approval of contracts and review of non-labor contracts will no longer be necessary. There are some other things that under a tier 2, it's a little lessened oversight, but I think that the monthly reports we will still continue to receive. So congratulations to the city of Hartford on this milestone, and we look forward to continued progress and strengthening those financials under the new administration. I don't think that the Ms. Coleman is with us yet. No, okay. Cormier. And so the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from September 21st. Included in the mailing was those minutes. Any questions or discussion? If not, could I get a motion for approval of those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Mark. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Stephen. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Mark, I didn't hear you. Sorry, or Bob White.
Yes.
I abstain.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, the minutes have been approved. The next item on the agenda today is presentation of the fiscal year 2023 audit reports. And with us today is Leslie Zoll from Clifton Larson and Allen, as well as Grace. And I'm not going to say your name because I know I'm going to butcher it, and that would not be very nice of me to do to you. So Grace, please say your last name for me.
Musitwa.
Thank you. I still won't be able to say that. Forgive me. Leslie, I'm going to turn this over to you unless the city has anything that they would like to say prior. I was assuming that we would go right to Leslie. Julian or Leanne?
Good morning, everyone. I'll just say a few words. This year's audit under CLA again was another good one. We were able to reach all of our deadlines, although we had to push a few this year. It got a little dicey towards the end, but we were able to push everything across the finish line just in time. There's a strong teamwork effort in order to make sure that the city is able to file timely every year, and without CLA, it would be a difficult task. So many thanks to the CLA team and to my full accounting team and the Board of Ed's finance team, as well as Treasury and Budget. We all really banded together this year and we got it done. So thank you to all.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I share my screen?
Please do.
Can you guys all see the bike here?
Yes.
I can.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me here at your MARB meeting this morning. I'm here to present the audit results of the City of Hartford for the year end 6/30/2023. For my agenda this morning, I'm just going to briefly go through, the terms of our engagement as auditors, the summary results of the city's audit, some financial statement highlights for you, and then I'm going to have Grace review the federal and state single audits and government's communication to you, and then I will take it back to just share with you some GASB pronouncements in case you're not aware of them. So in terms of
Oh, hold on. We're getting some backlash. I'm sorry. Stephen, I'm putting you on mute.
Thank you.
So in terms of our engagement, we are engaged to express opinions on whether the basic financial statements are presented in accordance with government accounting principles. The management is responsible for those financial statements. We come in and we determine whether or not those financial statements are correctly reported. We also express an in relation to opinion in relation to the financial statements as a whole, to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, as well as the schedule of expenditures and state financial assistance. And lastly, we do express an opinion on compliance related to any major state and federal programs that we test throughout our audit. I think it's important to note that we do not opine on internal control. However, if any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses come about during the course of our audit, we would be required to disclose those to the city and those charged with governance in a report. So we do provide a report on internal control and also compliance. And we also provide a report on internal control as it relates to the state and federal programs that we test each year. In terms of the results of the audit, the financial statements received an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. That means the financial statements were materially stated in accordance with GAAP. We have no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses as it relates to internal controls over the city for the 6/30/2023 audit. In terms of the federal single audit, we did issue on time this year, as well, time meaning 12/31. You received an unmodified opinion on those programs that we tested, and Grace will go over those later in the presentation. We have no findings or no significant deficiencies to report to you today. Same on the state single audit. They received a clean opinion on those programs we tested. No compliance findings or significant deficiencies in internal controls noted. So I'm going to go through the exhibits in the front of the financial statements. I have added page numbers to each of these slides so that if you would like to go back and look at the ACFR in totality, you may do so. You can stop me at any time if you have any questions. This particular exhibit is Exhibit 1 within the financial statements, the statement of net position. And it basically shows, as you see here, 3 different columns. The governmental activities column is what I'll speak to first. That governmental activities column includes all of the funds of the town with the exception of fiduciary funds and proprietary funds, so all your enterprise funds. That governmental activities column is on the full accrual basis of accounting, so it does include your long-term assets and your long-term liabilities, which the fund financial statements do not. Total net position for the city of Hartford as of 6/30/2023 was $741 million. That is an increase of $46.4 million from the prior fiscal year. I also just wanted to know an increase in the city's capital assets of $3.3 million. And also a decrease in long-term debt of 85.7 million. That significant decrease in part was due to the bond refunding that the state did on behalf of the city. The second column on this exhibit is business type activities. That business type activities column represents all the enterprise funds for the city. The major enterprise fund is the Hartford Stadium Authority. It also includes two non-major enterprise funds, the parking facility and the golf course fund. This too is on a full accrual basis of accounting. Net position is 19 million, and that increased from the prior fiscal year, 371,000. That last column on this exhibit, the Hartford Parking Authority, is the component unit for the city. We do not audit this component unit. It is audited by other auditors. And there was revenues and expenditures of 6.9 million during the course of the fiscal year. Now I'm going to move on to the governmental fund statement. This is the balance sheet exhibit 3 within the ACFR. It can be found on page 17. The statement of changes in fund balance can also be seen in the ACFR on page 19. You'll see here a number of columns representing major funds within the city of Hartford. So the first column on the balance sheet is the general fund. The general fund is always a major fund. Obviously, it accumulates a lot of the operations of the town. Total fund balance is 59 million. That's an increase of 20.6 million for the fiscal year. From a budgetary standpoint, I just wanted to point out that the expenditures were 10.4 million less than what was budgeted, and the revenues were 14.5 more than was budgeted. And both of those situations impacted the increase in fund balance for the year. Those two numbers can be found in the RSIs in the back, and I have shown you the page numbers there if you would like to go back to the ACFR to look at the detail of that. Also, tax collections has stayed relatively stable, which is pretty comparative to the rest of the state at 6/30/2023. And then I'm just going to go through some of the other major funds of the city on this one exhibit. You have capital improvement funds, total fund balance of 25.6 million. That's an increase of 1.3 million from the prior year. Community development loan and grant fund balance increased 251,000 from last year. The debt service fund increased 387,000. Educational grants of the Board of Education has a restricted fund balance of 8 million. That's a decrease of 4.4 million from last year. The American Rescue Plan Fund currently does not have a fund balance because of the revenue recognition standards. So as the city spends those ARPA funds, the revenue will get recognized when those expenditures are incurred. In 6/30/20 during the fiscal year 6/30/2023, the city recognized $36.6 million of that advance on the ARPA funds. Miscellaneous grants fund, that fund balance decreased 2.4 million. It's now 32.3 million. And then that last column on the balance sheet is accumulation of all the smaller non-major governmental funds within the city, and that fund balance increased to 6.4 million. You will see, I just want to make note that you will see some negative unassigned fund balances related to some of the smaller grant funds. And that's really due to revenue recognition of the grant monies not being received within 60 days. So Exhibit 5 within the financial statements are your proprietary funds. As I mentioned earlier in Exhibit 1's activity, that business type activity fund. So we kind of went over those already. I'd like to just share with you that last column on this exhibit, the internal service funds. The internal service funds, there's 5 funds within the city that make up that number. And that is detailed in the back of the ACFR on page 143 for anyone who wants to go back and look at those in detail. I just wanted to note the activity within those internal service funds. So the net position on the workers' comp decreased 200,000. That's a negative 22.1 million. Liability and property damage decreased 200,000. Your Metro Hartford Information Services Fund decreased 123,000. Retirees decreased 422,000, and your actives increased 12,000. So currently, internal service funds do have a negative net position of 17.9 million. And I believe, and Leanne can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's because of the IBNR that's recorded on a full accrual basis of accounting here. That's not currently funded. And then lastly, for the exhibits, I'd like to share with you the fiduciary funds statement, Exhibit 8, on page 24 of your ACFR. That pension and OPEB trust fund column is a combination of all of the pension funds as well as the OPEB trust fund. The MRF net position increased 55 million this year. Retirement allowance fund 7,000 was paid, was contributed by the employers and paid in benefits. Fireman's relief fund had revenues and expenditures of 25,000. Police fund 125,000, both in employer contributions and benefits paid. And then the OPEB trust fund net position is 26.8 million, and that's an increase of 1.9 million. Just some other financial highlights to bring to your attention today. For the city, net OPEB liabilities, the city side is 287 million, and the Board of Ed is 2.5 million. And in terms of net pension liabilities, the MRF plan is 538.4 million as of 6/30/2023. The next plan is the RAF, PBF, FRF plan. That's that net pension liability is 980,000. The 415 plan liability is 74,000, and then the MERS plan, that's a cost sharing plan with the state of Connecticut, is 40.5 million. I'm going to send it off to Grace.
Thank you, Leslie. All right, so for the federal single audit, the total federal awards expanded in fiscal year 23 were 223.3 million. And the major programs we tested were Title I grants to local education agencies, and then Education Stabilization Fund, and the third one was coronavirus, state and local fiscal recovery funds. And lastly, we tested special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. We issued unmodified opinion on compliance for these major programs, and there were no compliance or internal control findings for these programs. For state single audit, total state awards expended were 428.7 million for fiscal year 23. We tested the following major programs: magnet schools, early care and education program, and then lastly, we tested tiered payment in lieu of taxes pilot. We also issued unmodified opinion on compliance of these major programs, and there were no compliance or internal control findings for these major programs. All right, for the governance communication, at the conclusion of the audit, we are required to communicate to you the following. For the new standards, the city adopted GASB 96 that relates to subscription-based information technology arrangements. And then for significant estimates, we identified the following. Management estimate of the useful lives of capital assets, management estimate of the net pension liability and the net other post-employment benefit liability, which is based on actuarial assumptions. And then management estimate of the incremental borrowing rate used for leases. And lastly, we identified management estimate of the incurred but not recorded liability relating to workers' compensation and medical costs. So we also wanted to report to you that there were no disagreements with management when we are carrying out the audit. Management did not consult with other accountants. There were no difficulties encountered in performing the audit, and we did not have any uncorrected misstatements. And lastly, there are no independence issues. I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
I just want to bring to the attention of the city and the MARB that some of the new standards that are coming down the pike that will impact some of our municipality financial statements. The last 2 years, we've had some significant GASBs that were pretty much a heavy lift in terms of our municipalities trying to gather information and accumulating all the leases. I think we have a buy year in 6/30/2024. The 2 statements applicable are clarifications on older standards as well as accounting changes and error corrections. So I'm not sure that this will impact the city of Hartford. Coming to fruition in 6/30/2025, however, there will be some changes to how we calculate the compensated absences within the financial statements in long-term debt with statement 101. So we will be working with the city to try and make sure they're on task in implementing that for 6/30/2025. Our contact information is available here if you have any further questions. Do you have any questions now for us?
I'll leave it to
This
the. Good. Go
this
ahead,
may
Bob.
be a question to the city, but the unfunded internal service fund of 17 million, I'm just wondering what the, and this just may be a reminder because I forget, but what are the steps, if any, that the city is going to be able to take to rectify that? And how serious is it? Is that the kind of thing you can kind of pay go your way through this?
Good morning. I can take that, Leslie, and then you can jump in if I misspeak. So, Commissioner, we fund actual claims when they're presented to the city for payment. So with the IBNRs, we don't fund the IBNR because we know that the expense is coming forth as an actual charge in, the upcoming months. So as far as IBNRs, the numbers fluctuate up and down every year, but we don't look to fund it because we know it will be actually funded when presented for payment.
Thanks for the clarification. And I think you said that earlier. So good. Thank you.
Welcome.
I would like to piggyback off of that comment from Bob, which is, have you noticed, and I haven't done that yet, to be honest with you, is this number growing or from prior year, or is it stayed constant?
I
Did
mean,
you hear-
it fluctuates year over year, but nothing material. So we are
Okay.
working with the risk manager on strengthening our safety program so that we can try and bring those workers' comp numbers. She's been working very closely with our Corporation Counsel office to close down old claims to get rid of the tails for the expenditures in the outlying years. So those are the types of approaches that we take when it comes to workers' comp. And as far as ALGL, you know, it's accident based. So we try with the automobile side. This past year, we offered multiple defensive driving classes to all public safety personnel and those staff that are actually driving city vehicles. And that was received very well by the team. So we're starting to rely more on the safety training all around because we can see it has a much positive effect on claims.
Leanne, one more question on OPEB, which is obviously a problem that many cities have and certainly the state has. Do you have any idea when you hit the wall? That is, when you aren't going to be able to do pay-go?
Sure. So we don't foresee any issues coming up with the pay-go approach on OPEB. Under Mayor Bronin for the past 8 years, the thought process has been when the city experiences a surplus in the general fund, that we would increase fund balance by at least 5 million every year, first and foremost, and then fund any capital project activity that we were not able to fund throughout the normal budgeting process. And then lastly would be to approach the OPEB liability. So we've still got some work. We've got a lot of big projects happening throughout the city. Obviously, we can't fund everything that we need to do, but as things pop up and, you know, or become an emergency status, then we kind of figure out a funding approach to getting that project funded.
Has the new mayor been able to take a look at that priority and see if he wants to continue that arrangement where surplus is allocated as you set forth?
Yeah, so he's been in office for 2 weeks. So
Yeah, what's he doing?
we haven't gotten to that part yet of the discussion, but we are currently starting our budgeting process for 25. So those discussions will definitely be happening in the next month or so.
Okay. Say hello to the new mayor. He was a student of mine, and he did very well in bankruptcy, and I hope he doesn't need it.
Will do.
Any other questions from the MARB members? I do have a couple more, but I wanted to let the members get an opportunity. All right. Leslie or Grace, one of my questions is in the area of risk concerns, were any of those brought to your attention during your audit process that you would like to bring to the attention of this board as an oversight board?
No, nothing material to report.
And how about any areas of improvement or best practices or any strategic thinking, forward thinking that you would advise that you think that this board should be aware of for the city of Hartford as they take their path forward?
I don't at this time, Kim. I do think that, you know, the city is, you know, constantly improving their policies and procedures. They do have an internal audit department that, you know, goes through the different departments, anything that they might seem as risky, and address those on a timely basis. So I think there's a good structure in place there. I mean, there's always room for improvement in any organization, and we discussed that during the course of our audit. But there's nothing of concern that I would want to bring or need to bring to the MARB at this time.
Very good. Thank you. It's just good for our work to be aware of things that we should focus in on. And I think that we did discuss some of those. I don't have any other questions regarding the financials. Does anybody on the OPM staff team have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you, John. All right, I think that concludes the presentation of the fiscal year 23 audit, and congratulations to the team and all your hard work in meeting that deadline, and also to the audit firm. Are you the audit firm for next year? Do you know that yet?
We are.
Okay, well, that's great. Then we will look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Grace.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Excuse me. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is other related business. Today we have, I believe the Board of Education is with us today. Paul, I was wondering if you would be able to give this board an update regarding the fiscal year 24 budget projections and the news of the potential shortfall at the end of the year.
Yes, and good morning again. So in terms of fiscal 24, I don't have a full projection of our fiscal 24 for you at this moment. We are working on it, on where we are. I will say that I think the board is aware. In our fiscal 24 budget, we made some assumptions, for example, the 6% vacancy assumption, as well as the we assumed a sort of a $2 million budget task that would be solved over the course of the year. We are still tracking that, and our vacancies are not below the 6%, so we're encouraged by that. The other thing we have done this year is introduce some, I would probably describe them as relatively aggressive sweeps of budgets. And so, for example, this month we are, for certain non-salary accounts, we're sweeping any budgeted amounts in excess of 50% of the original budget. To make sure we're on track for the fiscal 24. I think, I know that there's been a lot of press in the last few days around our fiscal 25 projection. So I don't know if you want me to speak to that.
Yes, please.
Okay, so in terms of the fiscal 25 and just the context in which it came up, and we started our budget process quite a bit earlier than we have, knowing that the COVID relief funding cliff was upon us. And it's something we've been forecasting for a few years now. So I'll be honest in saying I was a little surprised. People were surprised because it is something we've been talking about for a while in terms of the implications of COVID relief funding going away. But we started really in November, starting to look at our fiscal 25 budget at a very high level, because we knew we wanted to engage deeply with our community and identifying, knowing that we would have less. That's just our reality, right? We will have less to spend in fiscal 25 than we certainly have over the last 3 years. We wanted to engage deeply with the community in a conversation about priorities. So we started that work, and this most recent round of press really emanated from a community budget forum that we held last Thursday evening, where we gave an overview of the current status, and then really went into breakout rooms with members of the community to talk about priorities and talk about what was of concern to them. So let me just speak to, I think the number that's gotten the most attention was the $77 million number. And so let me speak to that and where that comes from. And essentially, one of the things that was challenging in terms of right, we attempted to be as clear as we could be in our presentation, but right, I believe in the article, the first article that came out, it talked about a fiscal 24 budget of 429 million and a fiscal 25 of about 500 million. And that was, right, that's because it doesn't reflect some of the things we did in our FY24 budget, like the vacancy assumption. And so actually our budgeted expenses for FY24 were closer to 464 million, right? But then we make assumptions using the vacancy savings and the budget task, where we assume that some portion of the budgeted expenses won't in fact be spent. And so, right, the increase is not actually that dramatic or as dramatic as it would have appeared in that article. That being said, just to give you context, where does the 77 number come from? So based on our current projections, and I will highlight for you a couple of variables that remain uncertain for us, but based on our current projections, without any conversation about COVID relief funding, right, we're projecting a $23 million increase in costs. That's contractual increases on labor contracts, but that's not the bulk of it. The bulk of that is coming from, let me just pull it up here. We're projecting a $3 million increase in internal special education costs. That's not the out of district, that's just inside the district. $4 million in transportation. Our timing was great last year, less great this year. For our busing contract, we have to go out to RFP this year. And we haven't for the last several years, which has meant all of the inflation that we've all experienced in the last few years, that's going to hit us on our bus contract this year. We're expecting a $9 million increase in tuition, $1 million increase in utility costs. And then about $5 million is sort of the everything else, right? So contractual salary increases. That gets us to sort of the increase that we would have in our total costs, independent of any ESSER realities. And then, right, last year we made some assumptions. We made a 6% vacancy assumption, which is $21 million. We decided that we would use, this was at the request of our board, that we would soften the blow last year by leveraging $9 million of our ARP funds to help balance the budget. We had a budget task for $2.1 million. And so really when you take all those things together, right, the anticipated increase in costs, coupled with the things we did this year to mitigate cost, that gets us to about 60 million in delta between our projected revenue of 426 million and our projected costs. So how we got to 77 is there are programs and functions, activities that we are currently funding with COVID relief funding that we believe need to continue. And so what we were attempting to do in our community budget forum last Thursday is make sure we were being honest with the community about the reality that, right, so you could say that if we said we're not going to do anything ever again that we've done for the last few years with COVID relief funding, that our deficit is 60 million. So we have a placeholder of about 17 million in things that are critical. So just to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Some of we're with COVID relief, we were able to introduce new alternative programming at the high school level. Right? We don't necessarily believe that we're at a place in the recovery from the pandemic where that can just all go away. We added a number of social workers, given the social, emotional, and mental health needs that our students were experiencing. And so we have a number of social workers. We can go back to sort of pre-pandemic levels. We don't believe that's a reflection of the actual need of our student population. We have curriculum that we've adopted, some of which was adopted in response to state legislation around the science of reading. That curriculum, right, the big upfront costs we're able to cover with COVID relief, but any curriculum you buy has annual consumables, right, workbooks and things like that you have to purchase. We had expanded translation services in the district, also in response to some, both the need in terms of meeting the needs of our community and changes at the legislative level. And so that's where, so I hope that helps in terms of understanding where the 77 million comes from, that it is a combination of, we can't assume that we can necessarily take the same budget mitigation steps we took last year. For example, we don't believe we can assume a 6% vacancy rate in fiscal 25 because the education labor market will be different next year because every school district is going to be having to cut positions likely in the wake of the COVID relief. And so the shortages that we've experienced and that's made hard to fill positions won't be the reality next year. And so it's a combination of not necessarily being able to make the same mitigation assumptions with actual increases in costs and the belief that we want to keep some things. So we recognize when I say there's maybe 17 million in programming and activities we'd like to maintain that were funded with COVID, right? Our revenues are revenue. So at the end of the day, we have to achieve a balanced budget. And so part of our conversation with our community is what in the general budget can we let go of? If some of these things that I just named, like high school alternative programs, additional social workers, if things like that need to be maintained. And so that's why we started as early as we did with the conversation. And so that's where the 77 comes from. Let me just tell you a couple of the variables that are uncertain for us at this moment. One is we very appreciative of the action the legislature and the governor took last year with the budget. There was 150 million additional allocated to K-12 education in last year's in the budget for FY25, I should say. So 68.5 million of that was for the acceleration of ECS. 81.5 million was for additional per pupil grants for open choice, charter, magnet, and voc ag seats. Where we're at this moment is, and with thanks to the Connecticut School and State Finance Project, and with appreciation, right? The estimate we have for that is a $4.7 million increase in ECS for Hartford Public Schools. So we feel relatively confident in that number. But we have not nailed down. We've started to get some additional information in the last few days. But of the 81.5 million, the portion that would come to us would be around the additional grants for magnet seats. And we have not been able to nail down what that dollar figure is for the Hartford Public Schools. That has remained uncertain. And so there is a chance, right now, that 77 million deficit is premised on a revenue number of 426.6 million. That 426.6 could go up. We have a very small assumption in there about an increase in magnet operating grant. We just don't know what portion of that 81.5 million is coming to Hartford. The one other variable that's uncertain for us is the legislature also passed a cap on general ed tuition payments. And so the tuition that we pay for general education to, for example, CREC, when our students go to a CREC magnet school, is for FY25 is capped at 58% of the FY24 level. We don't know yet. We're working on that. What does that translate to us in tuition savings? What I will say is when we looked, for example, we did an analysis of our 21-22, more than 3/4 of our total tuition is special education tuition. So even though that cap is we're appreciative of the cap, that's only capping the general ed tuition, which is a pretty small portion of our total tuition bill. And just to give you context on that, our total tuition projection for FY25 is $115 million on a total revenues of 426 million. And I just want to highlight that, right, that's, close to a quarter of our budget is committed to tuition. That's a dramatically different percentage than the statewide average. So that was a lot. Why don't I pause and just, see if there's questions on all that? So I do know it's been a big topic. I know there's been some surprise expressed, and I think, certainly we're appreciative of the work the state's doing to increase our revenues. But I think, our intent has been to be as transparent as possible going into this COVID funding cliff and be really upfront with the community, because what we don't want to do is, ultimately have our board adopt a budget and people be surprised that there are things that are cut.
Any questions from the members? Yes. Well, go ahead, Mark.
Because of the competition of monies available now that COVID money is is going to be running out. Internally, as the superintendent and/or administration evaluated programs that have been developed, implemented with the new money, and the existing programs that have been around for years, to determine the efficacy of those programs to help say what do we need and what don't we need. I mean, addition is a great thing, but there are things that occur because they've been occurring. And that's not necessarily when they're in competition with another program, a newer quote unquote program, or the demographic shifts. One has to evaluate if the program that it's been existing under a different demographic is a program that can be reduced, altered, somehow adjusted to the new demographic. We know that Hartford's demographics are changing considerably, and based on the social worker comment you made and the dual and the English comment regarding communication with the non-speaking parents and students, that's a new dynamic that's been increasing over the years for Hartford. Not unforeseeable, but nonetheless there. So my question in the end is, are you aware if there's from your perspective financially, is there any programmatic examinations occurring to help you in the bottom line numbers that need to be adjusted?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the questions. And the answer is yes. So we're examining. It's partly why I lifted that the fact that we're trying to balance, right? We don't want to just assume that everything we did with COVID relief is going away and everything we've always done not with COVID relief is staying, which is why I lifted the idea that there might be up to 17 million in programs and activities that have been funded with COVID relief that we might want to maintain, even if it means cutting other things. And so we are looking at, we're really trying to take a holistic approach and look at the entire budget and examine and analyze, as you're describing, what's been most effective. I mean, one example I can give is, right, attendance coming back from pandemic, I think everywhere has been problematic. We've put in some highly effective initiatives to try to reduce our chronic absenteeism. Some of that has been funded with COVID relief. We don't necessarily believe that should go away. And so that's an example of something where we feel like there's been some programming that's been efficacious, and trying to think about identifying programs that maybe have been less effective. I think the other thing we're contemplating is what opportunities exist to create greater flexibility at the school level, because one of the things that's also happened is we gave schools some flexibility with their COVID relief dollars. And obviously schools are closer to students and closer to the work than those of us in central office. So what opportunities exist to allow schools to make some strategic choices? Like there may be things that schools did that were effective, and it might vary from one school to the next with COVID relief dollars that they want to maintain, and there may be things they're willing to give up. And so we're contemplating what does it look like to introduce some additional flexibility at the building level in the strategic choices about what has been effective, not necessarily district-wide in every case, but also just what's been effective from one school to the next, and let them make some choices about that.
Two more, and then that should be it. The issue of special education costs for Hartford because of the Chef decision and the influence of CREC. Historically, we've examined the special education percentage rates internally and magnet school attendees to CREC, and we found, at least I remember as best I can, that there's a significant increase in percentage of number of special ed students in Hartford that Hartford quote unquote sees every day versus those students that attend CREC. I'll just use CREC schools. And it's, when I say significant, it's significant. And those are costs that are borne by Hartford, offset by education, the state fund, but nonetheless, ever increasing costs that Hartford pays to CREC for educating its students. But a significant portion of that is going towards special education. I've asked that consideration be given, and I know the difficulty because of personnel problems, for the making sure that Hartford is actively involved in those identification processes, PPTs, IEPs, et cetera, for those students. And it may be that Hartford would consider bringing in your Speaker of the House, who's a Hartford rep, to discuss with him this, let's just call it an anomaly, because I think in comparison to the state, it's clearly an outlier, and it's affecting the regular programmatic costs that you have available for the remaining students in Hartford. And to me, that's a problem. So I'm requesting or asking that as you proceed, that the examination regarding special education continue to determine if in fact there's a higher proportion, examine why, and how Hartford can be involved in maybe dealing with that at the school level prior to them going to a magnet or a choice school. That's been around for years, since we first started our entry into MARB, and it is yet to really, that those costs have only gone up. I know the State Department did an examination 5 years ago and had little impact. My concern is the special education costs accelerating, leaving less for the general education costs. And the question is, should the special education costs oversight be more involved with the local than just turning it over to a CREC school? That's more of a statement than it is a question, because I think that Hartford's doing the best it can with the personnel it has. My suggestion is that's an issue that's been around for a long time. And if it's a budget driver, then some examination needs to take place. Because as I said, there's the Chef decision in '91, when we all supported it, was one that was valid, but there are unintended consequences. And I believe that they're hitting the wall now with the remaining regular ed students in Hartford. And I think there needs to be a reexamination of its goals and its funding. Because Chef normally is funded by throwing money at it rather than looking at the policy, as you know. And lastly, your funding from the city has been stable, I guess, for the past 5 years.
Yeah, I think I don't have this specific in front of me. I think it's been longer than 5 years.
And we do have the authority to demand that you get more money from the city, which we don't take lightly. But and we've never really examined the school board budget in isolation to see if the local should contribute more. But in a Hartford situation, I think it's examination that needs to be done, because you're under a new administration with new policies, et cetera. And what was right a while ago may not necessarily be correct today because of the COVID impact and programmatic impact. So I'm hopeful that those discussions will occur with the city in the future.
Yeah, I certainly think the superintendent and the mayor will be talking, and the new mayor, and certainly, I would defer to the board on that. I mean, I think I can understand, certainly the city has its own challenges, and I think, there has been, right, when you look at face value at our district, our enrollment of students we serve every day has declined over those years. And I just on the special education, I appreciate your comments, and I think we are trying internally to think about what we can do to address some of those rising costs, and that includes some of what you talked about in terms of thinking about how do we make sure we're represented at every PPT meeting for Hartford resident students, regardless of where they're being served. That's one thing we're thinking about, as well as what opportunities exist as the labor market improves for us to serve more of our students in-house as opposed to out of district. But I will, just to put a number around what you described, we had an outside entity do some analysis for us around sort of comparative per pupil spending. And one of the things they came back to us with is that the average district in Connecticut spends 6% of their budget on special education. In Hartford, it's 17%. And so I think that just puts a number to what you're describing. And that's that's historically been the case. And our concern was how to reduce that number from a policy perspective. The students obviously need servicing if they're truly identified appropriately. The question is how to do that with the cooperation of all the entities involved. But I thank you very much for the response.
Thank you, Mark. Over to Lisa. Thank you for waiting. Oh, I can't hear you. You're still on mute.
Sorry, I put my hand down and thought I unmuted my microphone. I apologize. Just to piggyback of what you're talking about, Mark, with regards to the students that attend a choice program and have an IEP, unfortunately, I think that there's very little that Hartford Public Schools can do. I mean, you could have an employee present for those conversations as to what services are required pursuant to the IEP. Unfortunately, it's up to the receiving district or the choice program as to how much they charge. So even if Hartford Public Schools employees are in the room, they're still going to get charged whatever the receiving district wants to charge for those services. So the system, as you were talking about, Chef, I mean, the system is set up such that Hartford Public Schools is constantly facing a deficit at the beginning of every fiscal year, simply because so many of their students attend choice programs because of the Chef agreement. And then they have tuition bills being sent to them that they have very little discretion over, unfortunately. But getting back to the numbers that you were providing, Paul, so the $77 million obviously is a very large number, which is why it sparked so much interest and I think reporting. And I tried to take notes as you were going through all of the different things, but I don't think that they sum up to $77 million. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just sending along the buckets that you referenced, because I certainly missed some, but I want to try and make sure that I understand. So you all did not factor any change to anticipated revenue as a result of the budget that passed last year. Is that correct? Like the increase in ECS and therefore your Alliance District funding, the 77 million assumes no change in revenue.
No, sorry. It includes the 4.7 that we're anticipating in the accelerated ECS. The part it doesn't include is I'm sorry, we did include a very small placeholder, right? We put in 1.5 million as a placeholder for a potential increase in magnet operating based on the other half of the additional funding that was allocated for FY25. So we just don't know what that number is. We have heard sort of grapevine numbers that it's larger than that, but we have not been able to nail that down. So that's the one remaining variable, like that revenue number could go up from that 426 that we're looking at right now, but the 4.7 is already in there. And I didn't say this, but the other thing is at the very end of the legislative session last year, 3 million was added to Hartford Public Schools. And that was really because Hartford wasn't eligible for the tuition offset grant in FY24. And as of today, that 3 million goes away. So we're looking at a 4.7 million increase in ECS, but a $3 million decrease, right, without that additional funding that was provided in FY24. So, apart from knowing what that magnet operating increase is, it's not a big bump.
Okay, so you did factor in the increase in ECS, just not the magnet operating support increase, nor the tuition savings.
Right. We're still looking at tuition savings. And again, the reason we're being conservative about the tuition savings is because so much of our tuition is special ed, which the cap doesn't apply to. Right.
Okay. So yeah, if you could just send along those larger buckets that you referenced at the beginning of your discussion, I would appreciate it. I did write down, for example, $3 million in SPED. I don't know if that is your anticipated tuition increase or if that's directly for students that you may outplace or provide services for in district. And then I was a little bit unsure about the transportation increase. I think that you mentioned that you're going to be going out to RFP for a new provider. So I'm curious as to why you think that would result in a $4 million increase besides just normal inflationary changes. And then the other thing that I was curious about is, so of the $77 million, is only 17 million, is that correct? Only 17 million is related to one-time programs that were funded with ESSER that you think that Harvard Public Schools thinks should be ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, the 17 million is really a placeholder of, as we're continuing the prioritization conversations with the community of, programming that we'd like to continue. That's both non-salary and salary, and some of the things I described. So we spent, in FY24, our ESSER, our COVID relief spending is 60 million. So I just want to be clear, right? Even if we're saying there's 17 million and things we want to continue, that's assuming that, $40 million in things that we did this year go away. And just, sorry, on the transportation, I can speak to that real quick. We're anticipating, I should say, our transportation team, when they talk to other districts who've gone out to RFP in the previous couple of years, they're getting increases around fuel costs and wage costs because of the national inflation over the last couple of years. We were insulated from that last year because we had an option in our contract to extend for another year under the current terms. And so the anticipated increase in transportation is because we're anticipating when we go out to RFP, the bidders are going to build in the inflation they've experienced on wages and fuel. Right, we haven't been hit with that yet, and so this is the year that's going to come due for us. And I will send those the additional numbers. There was sort of, I think partly why they don't add up is I was giving you two different sets of numbers. So there were a set of numbers that were describing the just general operating increase in expenses, right? And that, so that 3 million I gave you in special education is part of that. But then, you know, there's a, well, probably easier if I send them to you, right? There's a set of numbers of which that's one portion that adds up to the 77.
I just,
So-
I know, oh, sorry.
Excuse me.
Ask one more
No,
question.
no
Kim?
problem. Sure.
So I know-
Paul, when you do send them in through the OPM staff and we will forward it off to the members.
Will do.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you. Sorry, Kim. Just
fine.
one last thought. I know that the article in the current Superintendent Torres Rodriguez mentioned the expansion of chef, right? So with the new chef agreement and the number of seats that are available under the chef agreement in magnet schools, presumably the numbers of students that will be departing Hartford Public Schools to attend those choice programs will continue to increase. And I know it was probably like 10 years ago, I could be wrong, but Hartford Public Schools did do a round of closures, unfortunately, of mostly neighborhood schools. Has that all started to percolate back up as a possible way to reduce costs and to consolidate as you have fewer and fewer students?
I would say that there's obviously, as you know, lots of challenges with that. And I would say also, we're at a place where it's not clear. I guess the honest answer is we're of course looking at the numbers, right? The numbers of enrollment and facility size. The reality is we don't have a lot of facilities that have excess space, right? Because of that previous round of closures. And so, you know, additional closures would require there to be space to absorb those kids in another facility. And when we look at our facility capacity, I'll give an example of, right, you know, in the south end of Hartford right now, our neighborhood middle schools, our non-magnet middle schools are at their capacity. They can't absorb any more students. And so we've actually been seeing sort of an influx, particularly in the south end in our neighborhood schools. And so we're certainly looking at the numbers, but it isn't clear that there's not an obvious, you know, there's not an obvious move to make in terms of having a place where we could move a group of kids to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any other additional questions? Sounds like you have a lot of work to do, Paul. And in addition to the 25 budget, and it's also looking at where you're going to land at the end of this fiscal year. I meant to ask the auditor, and I did not do that. Do you know how much fund balance is tucked away for the board that's available? And do you anticipate using any of that for the fiscal year 24?
So I might lean on Leanne to help me with this.
Thank you.
There is still the 5.6 million of committed fund balance, which is their 2% reserve.
I was thinking,
Okay.
Leanne, we didn't use a little bit of that. I was thinking we did, but.
You did, and then the city replenished it.
Oh no, I know we used it all, but I thought we had to tap into a little of this year's.
Nope, you're
Okay.
good for 24 for 5.6.
So I will say I don't know yet if we're going to need to use that this year. You know, and certainly given everything I just described about FY25, if we can avoid using it this year, that would be our goal. I mentioned the sweeps earlier. One of the things we are doing with our COVID relief is we've swept that as well, based on whether, you know, funds that were intended to be spent a particular way have actually been used. And our intent, we have two purposes with that. One is to see what we can do around balancing 23-24 without accessing the non-lapsing fund. The other is because the COVID relief ARP money doesn't expire until September 30th of 24. There may be some costs in the first 3 months of the year for fiscal 25 that we can absorb, which will help soften the blow. So that's one of the mitigation strategies we're contemplating. But as it stands now, that's probably on the smaller end, right? On the order of maybe $5 million that we might be able to use of that for FY25. But certainly trying to balance this year without accessing the non-lapsing fund will be helpful next year.
One other question. As you mentioned, are you, it sounds to me like you're looking to take in the accelerated money this year for ECS in your FY25 budget. And knowing that the governor's budget has not been issued yet, 25 is still up where it could be changed if it needed to be changed. Nothing is concrete until the governor's budget is issued, because that was numbers that were issued in the biennial. And it sounded to me like you were looking to take that increase into consideration versus that addition could have been funded over 5 years and the state chose to ramp it up in 25. That would then, to me, create another issue in 26 if you did not flat fund it and somebody just continued to give you the money ahead of time. Do you understand where I'm going with this? So for instance, you said you got an additional $4.7 million, which was accelerated. That money was expected to go over 3 additional years, right? Because it could have been funded through 28, but it is being accelerated. Now, if you're taking that in and you need the $4 million to balance your budget for 25, then you would be shortchanging the additional million you would have gotten in 26, 27, or 28 million plus.
I don't think so. So my understanding of that is actually what's accelerated is a phase-in. And so they were phasing in to a particular final funding level for ECS. And so they're accelerating the phase-in. So we'll continue to get the 4.7 in FY26, FY27. And actually, I believe, Lisa might know this better than I do, I believe the accelerated phase-in would end in FY26, and we would be at the sort of what I'll call the full funding level.
It was accelerated from fiscal year 2028 for full funding to fiscal year 2026. So ultimately, if that acceleration did not occur by the legislature, then Hartford Public Schools would be receiving smaller annual increases year after year. But because they did accelerate it, they are receiving, it might be an additional $3 million. I don't know, I would have to check. Or $2 million, that if that was ultimately to be reneged by the General Assembly, because the governor's budget is going to come out in February, right? But ultimately, it's up to the General Assembly to change their budget later on. And so if that happened, then obviously Hartford Public Schools deficit would be larger.
Right.
We would definitely appreciate the acceleration.
But again, for me, it is just really accelerating. I call it like a one-time money that's really meant it for the future, not for a future year, not in this current year. To get to a base, you're going to peak up and you're going to drop back down again as it's accelerated.
I don't believe so. Sorry,
No?
I think basically we get a fixed dollar amount of ECS, and the legislature has been slowly increasing that fixed amount, and so
understand.
They increased our fixed amount by 4.7 this year. Next year, they might increase it by another 3, but the 4.7 doesn't go away.
That's not what I was referring to. I was referring to that when they agreed to provide additional funds, that they chose to fund it through 26, where in 27 and in 28, they had until 27 and 28 to pay those funds, but they didn't. They accelerated it by giving it to the municipalities earlier, was my understanding.
So then in fiscal year 26, districts should be, according to state law, districts will be 100% full funded in perpetuity. So it doesn't go back down statutorily, it stays 100%, unless of course the General Assembly modifies and makes reductions to ACS.
Mm-hmm. Got it. All right, any other questions? I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more about this in the time to come. When do you anticipate your FY24 budget will, 25 budget, excuse me, will be completed as we start to plan for upcoming meetings? Paul?
We pushed back our target date for a board vote to the April meeting, which is April 16th. So our target
Okay.
date is to vote the budget on April 16th. And that was just because of the sort of community engagement process I described and wanted to get out of time for that.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. All right. Any other related business that for discussion today concerning Hartford? All right. I hear none. And can I get a motion to adjourn this meeting today?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Mark. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good day and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.